I was trying to prove something. I wanted to show the world that this didn't take me down, that I was determined to do this. I never wanted to quit, but there were definitely mornings where I didn't know how I was going to get in the saddle again. Like, I just didn't know how I was going to do another day. At that point, you have to get into that moment to moment mindset. Like, okay, all I have to do right now is get out of this sleeping bag. Okay, now I just have to get some warm clothes on. It really, sometimes you have to simplify it.
Welcome back to the 10 Adventures podcast. Today we are talking about grit, courage, and vulnerability. On the podcast, we have Risa August, author of The Road Unpaved, a memoir that documents her bicycle journey from Canada to Mexico while dealing with a serious pituitary disease. Blending adventure with powerful personal reflection, Risa takes readers inside the physical and emotional challenges of the ride and shows how resilience is forged on both the road and within. Hi, Risa. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Richard. I'm so grateful to be here.
I'm happy to have you. It's such a powerful book that you've written. I'm eager to dig in and share a little bit with the listeners.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
Let's start with kind of the central part of the book, which is your diagnosis of a rare pituitary disease. Can you maybe share a little bit more about that and what your life was like before you got sick?
Before I got sick, I like to say, very rigid in the way I operated in the world. I was an overachiever and an athlete, an Ironman athlete, and a rugged outdoors person, and a perfectionist. And so my lifestyle was very structured, routine, rigid, and I was always looking for the next thing, and it had to be harder and better and all of that. And then right around 2011, following my first Ironman race, I was actually training for a 500-mile bike tour in Oregon, and I just started noticing changes in my body, like extreme weight gain really quickly, struggling with recovery, joint pain in unusual places like my hands and my jaw, and blood sugar issues. So I started researching some things, and all signs were pointing to thyroid, which is really common for women to have thyroid issues. But my blood work kept coming back normal. And my doctor kept saying, "You're fine. I'm not worried. You're fine." Fast forward about 7.5 years later, um, and probably about 40 pounds heavier, and all kinds of changes in my body were taking place. And I was finishing another Ironman. I barely got through it, and then I couldn't recover. I thought I went into full out adrenal fatigue. I even looked into things like post Ironman depression, and I started having very severe headaches. And it took another year after that for a diagnosis, after pretty much demanding a brain MRI. And that's when I discovered I had a massive tumor at the base of my brain on the pituitary gland. And it was causing a very destructive disease called acromegaly. And at the time, I didn't know that my life would never be the same.
You spent years knowing something was wrong, but doctors couldn't diagnose it. What was it like just, not feeling right, but not having any solutions? Like that must have been really tough for you to kind of just day after day know something's wrong, but, everyone's saying, no, you're
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah. It was super frustrating because I really feel like people started to believe that I was a hypochondriac, like that I was just looking for something for a problem. And I even feel like the weight gain was the biggest thing. So because it was I had such a rigid lifestyle. I was constantly training, and I ended up getting really into CrossFit and weightlifting, and And I ate a very rigid diet, and I felt like when I would share my frustration with people of like, I don't know why I can't seem to lose weight, and I just keep putting it on, and I felt like people would stare at me like, "Sure, you're not eating potato chips and ice cream all night," and so I actually started to believe that I was in denial and that maybe I am overeating and I'm in denial about it. So I started going to Overeaters Anonymous. And I remember sitting in this circle and hearing these other stories, and I was like, none of this resonates with me. But I don't I was so desperate at that point of like, having an answer to things I couldn't explain.
Once you're diagnosed, like how did doctors want to treat the disease?
Once I was diagnosed, um, I didn't really there wasn't a lot of information out there, and I wasn't really given options. I was essentially told, "This has to come out. This tumor has to come out," and it still wasn't computing, but I mean, essentially, that meant brain surgery, and so that was the first step, and once we found, you have to wait 3 months post-surgery, and once we found that the rest was inoperable, I proceeded with radiation treatment, which was strongly encouraged. I didn't even know what other options were out there. Hindsight, I probably would have never got radiation treatment, and turns out I have to be on some pretty powerful medications, to control the disease.
While you're dealing with this diagnosis and, the treatment, uh, your marriage was also falling apart. It just seems like an enormous amount of stress. Just having one significant disease or having a marriage fall apart would be almost debilitating. How did you manage these two kind of hugely traumatic events happening at the same time?
It was the first time in my life where I had to stop putting everyone else first and really focus on myself. I was essentially in it alone and facing it alone. I didn't really have anyone out there helping me understand this disease or research it or figure out how to live with it and so I really became it was really a turning point in my life where I actually started asking myself that question of like, well, wait a minute, what do I need? What does Rissa need? And I almost put the dissolution of my marriage, like, you know, on the back burner. Like it was like I couldn't even put the focus there. I had focused on my marriage for 18 years. Like I had to now focus on me. So I'm not sure that really answered the question, but yeah, I became the focus of my life.
One thing I found really interesting is you talked about preparing for a difficult bike race, right after like it was 6 weeks after your surgery, based on previous things you had, and you had an expectation for what recovery was like, and it was nothing like that. And can you maybe talk about, what that was? You go through a 7 year issue of, there's something wrong, you finally get it fixed, but you're still really weak. Like, how did that impact you? Because it seems again like it's really, really hard to then not have a nice solution like a broken arm where suddenly you're better. It's like, "Oh, no, I'm still not who I was."
Yes, it's funny because I thought for me, it was all about validation. Like I knew something was wrong. Here it is. Let's get it taken care of so I can get on with my life. One, that was never going to, I was never going to be the same physically or mentally or like ever again. Like I said, it's this very destructive disease. But I remember sitting in my neuro surgeon's office, and he was like, well, okay. He was going over post-op instructions for me. And he's like, well, you're not going to be able to drive for about a month following surgery. And I said, well, I have a 250-mile bike event 6 weeks post surgery. Like, I need to train. And I think he thought he was being punked. Like, I think he thought I was joking. And I was like, no, I got to get back on my bike. And I really thought I was going to get back on my bike. I thought they were going to get this tumor out and I was going to get back to my life. And finally, I had all the answers. And that wasn't going to be my life ever again.
And then moving from someone who is, really strong and really active to all of a sudden post-surgery being super frail. It's rare that people actually get that aspect in kind of the middle of their life. We usually get that when we're old, at the end of our lives. How did you deal with, you know, getting actually, in the book, it seems like you got worse, you became more frail. How did you deal with that? And also, did you learn anything from that as you started to get better?
I mean, I went through the gamut of emotions because, I did proceed with radiation treatment, which has its own horrible side effects on your body. And I felt like I was betraying my body that I kept healthy for so many years. And then I had to be on all these really horrible medications, which I'm still on. And um, yeah, I just felt like the life in me just disappeared. I couldn't just get back on my bike. I couldn't even get some mornings I couldn't even get out of my pajamas. And I remember having this moment on my sofa, and I remember thinking, this is no way to live. And I made a conscious decision that day to live. I wanted to live. And so that was the day I signed up for an 1,800-mile bicycle journey from Canada to Mexico. And I had 14 months to figure out how I was gonna make that happen.
So that's right where I wanted to go is like you're in such, so much fatigue, so everything kind of sucks. And, in your mind, you say, okay, I'm going to go and ride across the United States. Like, maybe talk me through how that was, the next thing you're going to do. It wasn't like, okay, I'm going to do a century ride in Colorado, or I'm going to, do something like that. You choose something really, really hard and really specific. How did you get to that point that was your goal?
Yeah, well, I was forced to really reflect on my life. So many things were changing, not just my marriage, but my body, the way my brain connected to my body, my cognition was off. Um, and so it just puts you in this place of reflection. And I was like, is this like, have I been living my true authentic life? Like, have I been living the life I wanted? And I remember thinking of all the things, I guess my bucket list, if you will, like all the things I've always wanted to do that I'd never done. And here I was now facing this big upheaval. And um, I decided no more excuses. If I'm going to live, I'm going to really live. And I always wanted to ride my bike across the United States. And I thought, well, what's stopping me now? And so I started researching that same day on that sofa. I started researching different bicycle routes and found the one that felt the right one for me.
So most people ride across, from Pacific to Atlantic, or maybe less so Atlantic to Pacific. You went from Canada to Mexico, which is a route I think would be great, but it's not as common. So why did you choose that route instead of some of the other more well-known ones?
I've been all over the US. I think there's only 1 or 2 states I haven't been to, and I've ridden my bike in a lot of places around the country as well. And there's just parts of the 3 tiers, the northern, southern, and traditional, tiers that I I was like, "Nah, they're okay." And, um, but I used to live in Washington State. I worked in Oregon, and I loved California. I was just and I've been to parts of the coast, in my car, but I've never been, like, on like through Big Sur, or and I just and imagine riding your bike through the redwoods. Like it was just sounded magical to me.
And you're originally going to thinking about doing this solo, but you eventually joined a group trip, which sounded like it was a different type of riding for you. What was the decision making that pushed you into joining a group?
I thought it would be easier. um, I didn't know how my body was going to respond to this kind of rigorous event, and I also had to navigate some complex medical. I had to have an injection every 28 days, but it's not your typical, "Oh, stick a needle in your arm and you're done." It's a little more complicated than that. So I had to find, a medical professional to administer this particular medication for me, and so all around, I thought it would be easier to just have kind of a backup. I did what's called a semi-supported tour. So they hauled our gear from campground to campground each day, and it was up to us to figure out how to get there. And on one hand, um, it wasn't easier. You don't get to rest. Like if you're tired and you wake up, you got to follow that van if you want them to take your gear to the next town and catch up with them. And so it was, and then you're sharing kind of a space with 9 other people and 9, 10 different personalities, and so there's all those challenges. But you know, eventually I embraced it.
How many miles was the total trip over how many days? And then what would an average day be like in terms of riding and where you stay?
Yeah, so the total was 1,845 miles. We did it in 41 days with, I believe, 4 rest days. And we camped mostly at campgrounds. A typical day would be get up at 5:30 a.m., eat. For me, I would have a bowl of oatmeal and maybe a bagel with peanut butter, and get on the road probably by 6:30 or as soon as it's light enough to be on the road. And average would be 55 to 75 miles a day. It's a lot hillier than I think I expected, and I had to force myself to focus less on the biking and more on the surroundings, and like looking around and stopping and taking photos and sitting by the ocean. And so every day was a different day. The first 2 weeks were essentially rain and cold, and then it was just cold. And then when we got to Southern California, it started to warm up.
Now, you mentioned how bad the weather was at the start, and I hate, like, there's definitely things worse, but riding in the rain, it just flat out sucks. I don't know. Some people can do it, but like I think it's, your whole body gets wet. It gets within, everything start to chafe. Doing one day sucks, but you had like 2 weeks straight. How did you stay motivated when, you're just getting back into cycling these long distances? Then like every day sucks. Your tent's wet. Your sleeping bag, I'm sure, is damp and wet. Like, there's a lot of pushing there to like just say, hey, just get in the van, just chill out. Don't do it today. Just take it easy.
If you've been to the Pacific Northwest, it is damp. It's just damp. Like nothing seems to ever dry in the wet parts of that region. The van wasn't an option. They're very specific with that when you sign on. It's not SAG support. They haul your gear, period. They're there for emergencies, which there were a few during that trip. Um, but so that really wasn't an option. And also, I was trying to prove something. Initially, I wanted to show the world that this didn't take me down, that I was I was determined to do this. I never wanted to quit, but there were definitely mornings where I didn't know how I was gonna get in the saddle again. Like, I just didn't know how I was gonna do another day. But at that point, you have to get into that moment to moment mindset. Like, okay, all I have to do right now is get out of this sleeping bag. Okay, now I just have to get some warm clothes on. It really sometimes you have to simplify it.
Throughout the book, your tumor is ever present. You named it Bubba, and he's the co-star of the book. Can you describe your relationship with your tumor? Because I never thought, it's not a question I thought I'd ask, but it seems like there was like a definite relationship between you and him, I guess.
Yes, it started with, being so mad at my body for betraying me. I'd taken such good care of it for so many years, and, some of my holistic healer friends, started saying, like, Why don't you start talking nicer to your body? What if you encourage your tumor to kinda move along? You've served your purpose, let's move along, time to go." And I just thought that was ridiculous. But then one day I'm talking to my tumor in my car, driving somewhere, and I remember, one of my mentors saying, "You should name your tumor." And, again, that's just silly, but, the name Bubba stuck, and he's hilarious. He's a funny energy. I used to think was my nemesis, was the villain of my story, but he and I turned out to have a much different relationship by the end.
Going back to the bike ride, you started the bike ride with, obviously lots of different and strong emotions, and the group aspect, that's always a challenge of any group trip. And there's lots of horror stories where people aren't dealing with a tumor. Can you maybe talk a bit about how the group impacted you at the start of the ride?
Yeah, I think I went into the ride thinking, "This is my healing journey, and if I could do it solo, I would, but I needed to do this semi-supported trip, and I'm gonna just make sure everyone knows to basically stay away. I'm here to do my own healing." So in the beginning, I was pretty standoffish and perhaps a little annoyed. Everyone had their own reason for doing this ride, and I don't know, perhaps I was just really judgmental of everyone and just kinda get out of my way kinda thing. I'm gonna keep to myself, but they all grew on me, and it turned out very different.
Yeah, but like by the end, it seems like it become an extended family. And one thing I've always found is when you go on, these group trips and you get a good group, it does become a type of relationship that isn't easy to make in kind of modern society where we're always on our phones. We don't see people as much. Can you talk more about that change, and how much was it the group? How much was it just you maybe opening up to the experience in a different way?
What I came to realize was that connection is one of my top values, if not my number one value. I love connecting with people on a very human level. I'm not talking small talk. I want to hear your whole story, and I want to connect and find those common threads. And I also love to learn. So I love hearing other people's perspectives and just what they've learned in their life. It makes me all around better person. And so I had to start asking myself, like, why am I being so resistant to this? And then the people that wanted to help me, that I was annoyed with, um, all they all they did was want to get me through that ride. They wanted to see me succeed, and I'm going to start crying. Um, and so, I'm sure Bubba had to have a big talk with me about, opening up and stop being so resistant, and And they didn't, and the people around me didn't give up. They just kept riding with me every day, even if even if I was being cranky. So yeah, I'm very, again, very grateful.
Going into this ride, what did you expect to be the toughest physical or mental challenge? And then what actually was the toughest part of the ride for you?
There was one day that was a tough day. It was like a fourth, like 75-mile day in a row, but not a flat 75. It was just like hills after hills after hills, and just lots of climbing and, headwinds and traffic. We'd get these, you'd be on the coast of Big Sur with these sheer cliff drop offs, and you have a very tiny shoulder, if any, and semi trucks or massive RVs would whiz past you, and there's like a big backdraft when they whiz past you, and so you have to be careful not to overcorrect or you're going over that cliff. And so there were those kinds of hard days. And then there were the hard days of, I do not want to get out of this wet tent again. I don't want to do it again. But then you do. And then you do it again. And then you do it again. And then eventually you're 1,800 miles down the road.
When people go on long trips, they often talk or think, and I've done this myself, I'm going to figure out some great challenge in my life or things will be clear. And in my case, they almost never are. But when you did this trip, were you thinking, okay, at the end of this trip, I'll figured something out or my life will be different in a certain way? Were you hoping for something like that? And then, were you able to make that a reality?
I was hoping for that. I was hoping I would just have full clarity and know exactly what to do. My soul, my heart, everything would be healed. And this would give me that time I needed. And no, none of that happened. Uh, and I think it was an opportunity to process a lot of what I was facing in my life. But the journey didn't end when the bicycle ride ended. Like, my journey continued long after. I'm still on my journey, right? Um, so no, to answer your question, no, I didn't have the clarity and healing that I thought. I was on my way to that, toward that, but I didn't have it.
Near the end of the book, you write, we often create our own constraints to our own limits. But what happens when we remove those limiting thoughts and instead we believe that everything is possible? And I was wondering, have you taken your own advice and what did it mean to you when you did that?
I have taken my own advice. Do I have time to share a quick story
Yeah,
around
definitely.
that? So I was only supposed to, when I had brain surgery, I was only supposed to be in there overnight. I was supposed to have the brain surgery, be there overnight, and then out the next day. I ended up being in ICU for 10 days. And I remember on day 5 of still in ICU, and the doctor was making his rounds, and he said, um, as soon as he walked in the room, I was like, when do I get to go home? I was only supposed to be here for a couple of days. Like, when can I leave? And I was ready to get going, right? And he sat down next to me. He was just calm and kind, and he said, "It's all about a matter of perspective." And I'm like, "Okay, tell me." And he said, "Well, you're most likely the only one on this floor who will be going home." And that is when my perspective started changing. And so the physical therapist came around that day to take me. It's like, "Hey, Rissa, let's get up for your first walk post-surgery." And I was attached to so many things. I had compression boots on and an IV and an A-line and an oxygen mask and an oxygen sensor, and I had wires coming out of my chest and a catheter, and I'm like, "You gotta be kidding. Like, look at me. Look at me. I'm all tied up. There's no way I can go for a walk." And she didn't care. She started helping me get out of all that stuff, and we gathered the tubes that had to go with me, and I made it around the floor that day, and I got to see all those other patients that most likely wouldn't be going home, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I have been holding on to one perspective for so long, and I was keeping myself constrained to this role and this person who I used to be, and I really applied that to my life, and so when I started changing my life, I didn't have like, I was never gonna be the Ironman athlete again, and I was never gonna be the girl who remembered everything and was detail-oriented, and so suddenly my whole world opened up. And I started checking things off that bucket list and adding things like crazy to that bucket list and started doing things like indoor skydiving. And I took an aerialist silks class and Bollywood dance and improv. And my entire life opened up. And I didn't have to just be the girl who did Ironman races and took care of everyone else's needs. I could be all these other amazing things and do all these other amazing things. And sorry, that was a very long story, but I feel so passionate about it.
Going through the bike tour, going through obviously this traumatic health crisis and ongoing issues, what have you learned about yourself from this that can apply to other people that, maybe aren't going to do things that are as dramatic or as challenging?
Whew, I'm going to start crying here in a good way. I learned that I can do it and I don't have to do it. Um, and this actually became very clear on the last bike tour I did across northern Spain. It challenged me on every level. And I asked myself, like, why am I doing this? Like, what? And it's because it was kind of that old Risa. Well, you have to keep doing the harder thing or the better thing. And I proved to myself, because it, like I said, it was the biggest challenge of my life. I proved to myself, okay, I can do it. And I don't have to. I don't have to. And now, you know, I'm probably gonna, for example, I'm out there going to farmers markets and finding so much joy in that, and I'm supporting other people in their journeys. And my next big adventure might be more of a bike and cruise tour as opposed to something over the top. And so again, I can do it, and I don't have to do it.
Rissa, thanks for coming on the show today. It's such a powerful story you have, and I appreciate you taking time to share it with everybody.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Richard. I truly am so delighted that we got to have this conversation today. Thank you.
Where can people connect with you or follow along or learn more about, what you're doing?
You can find out all things on risaaugust.com. That's RISA August, just like the month.com.
And in terms of the book, you can find it obviously on Amazon and all the online places. You can also, the best thing to do, go to your local bookstore, support a local bookstore, ask them to order it in if they don't have it. It's a really powerful book with some, really important messages. And yeah, I think you'll love it if you pick it up for yourself or for a loved one. I'll put links to where to get the book and Rissa's website in the show notes. And everybody, thanks for listening to this episode of the 10 Adventures podcast.
Thank you, everyone.
We'll be back next week to explore the world and hear about more epic adventures. Bye-bye. Start planning your own adventure by visiting us at 10adventures.com and listen to other episodes of the 10 Adventures podcast on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you find your podcasts.